Hi, and welcome to Higher Hertz. I'm Justin Leopard, your online cello teacher, and today I'm just going to talk about, in broad strokes, how to get set up with your cello, how to get started playing cello, and just everything that you're going to be needing to get into cello in the first place. So we're going to talk in later videos about things like how to get a cello and things like that, but assuming that you already have a cello, we're just going to talk, how to get it out of its case. You typically unstrap it, just be very careful, the zippers and stuff don't get onto it. Once it's out of the case, you'll want to make sure that it's in tune before you do anything else. So to make sure that it's just generally in tune, you want to make sure that the strings make a normal sound as opposed to some sort of very weird sound. So that means it's too unstretched, too low in pitch. So what we do is we tighten this. You tighten it like a screw, but these pegs aren't screws. They're actually fitted in. If I unwound it all the way, I could just pull the peg out with absolutely no problem. So one of the first things that could be a challenge is if you have a cello that didn't have that great sizes of holes drilled. So this can be an issue, and then it can be a little bit hard to get the pegs to stay in place. But the trick to that is just to push in as you turn. And sometimes it's easier for the cello to face away from you. But for your guys' view, I'll do it this way. So the best way to be able to make sure that you're not going to snap the string is to just start by going flat. Start by going low. Flat is low in pitch, sharp is high in pitch. So if you're unsure, just make it flatter first. Or start flat. Find a reference note online. It's very, very easy nowadays. Online piano, cello tuner, that sort of stuff. It's very, very easy. And then once you've found it and you know the note that you're listening for, just slowly tune up until you get that note. So an A is hey. There it is. So you'll do the same process for the rest of the strings. And then these fine tuners down here are really awesome. So we don't always have to work with these pegs that don't have gears in them, that are just fitted. Once we're close, we can adjust the fine intonation with these fine tuners. And you can use a tuner for that at first, but it's really good with cello to be able to also hear the quality of the fifth, to really listen for whether those are in tune together. When a cello is open and ringing, it is going to be either in perfect temperament or it's going to be just a little bit off because you're trying to get the pure fifth resonances. If you don't understand what that is, we're going to talk about it later. Intonation is a crazy complicated concept, surprisingly, given that it seems like it's just the thing that whether a player sounds badly out of tune or not, but really, it's quite complicated, I promise you. So continuing on, once your cello is roughly tuned up, and other things you can check for are, that the bridge is straight, and I'm looking at the back of the bridge towards this way. So the fact that the front of the bridge is curved is okay, but I'm just looking for the back to be 90 degrees. And the next step for getting the cello set up is going to be to make sure that the end pin is the right length. So the easiest way to make sure that the end pin is the right length is to first figure out how the cello is supposed to fit against your body. Sorry for tapping that. So what you do is you want to try to just use your hands to place the cello so that the top is about halfway up your chest. If it's at your solar plex, it's too low, and if it's at your collarbone, it's too high. It's hard to get the proper technique in either position. So you want to find something where the pegs are about at or behind your ear, not too much above it. And then as far as angle out goes, you want the side of the cello to be able to hit the inside of your knee just a little bit. Just kind of like after the big knee part of your knee, when you get into the fleshy part, that's like the part that'll make contact with it. Now you don't have to squeeze, but it'll be used to control. So obviously I've been holding the cello up to this point. It's really helpful if you can have someone else, but even on your own, if you're able to remember the feeling of where this cello is, then when you get your end pin out, you want to be able to have it be at that level. And if it's off, adjust it. So ideally what you'll have when you're sitting with the cello is, the ability to move even without your arms moving it. Now let's talk for a second about posture, because posture is important, and if you don't have a good posture, it's going to affect the height of the cello in the first place. So good posture is not normal sitting. This is normal sitting, where I'm leaned back in the chair, I'm as comfortable as can be while still being upright. The problem with that is that I'm like falling away from the cello when the cello comes onto me if I sit like that. Maybe if there's a back of the chair, I can lean against that, but I'm overall not going to be able to get the same leverage on the strings to play. And also, because of that, I risk greater injury. Injury is actually a big factor playing cello. If you're getting into practicing 3 or 4 hours a day, and that's on top of rehearsals, I mean, doing any repetitive motion opens the door to carpal tunnel. Tendinitis is extremely common. And you don't want to get those things because you literally can't play your instrument for years. So that's the safety side of why it's important to have good posture. So good posture is basically how your upper body is when you stand, but just your legs are bent. So I'll show you what I mean. If I stand up, and I stand up tall and straight, and then I just bend my knees and sit down, I'm able to still have that good posture, even though I am now seated. And it's going to be with this sort of posture that you're going to be able to have the best motion over the cello. So once you're seated properly, your legs are the right distance apart, your feet are flat on the floor to give you the most, again, just strength when you're playing the instrument, and you have the cello at the right height, you're almost ready to start playing. And at this point, you could start messing around even without the bow. This is something that I really encourage, and I actually start my day practicing every single day by just free playing for 20 minutes. That's going to be the best way to get you accustomed to your instrument. It's also going to be the best way to be able to learn some improvisation, which, apart from being helpful if you want to play improvised styles of music, can be helpful for being able to play things with a in-the-moment flavor, even when it's written music, even though it's even classical music. So just, pluck different places. You can tap on it. Just don't be rough with the instrument, but just explore the instrument. Just put your finger in a random spot and just see what it sounds like to play up high. Just start getting the feel for it. The cello is a very well perfected craft of an instrument. These things are They can be made by machine, but there's so much else that goes into them besides the actual shaping of the cello, the knowledge that goes into it, the varnish and the proportions. It's crazy. This is why the best cellos are worth millions, is because the best cello makers are just as great as the best cello players. We have strings which used to be gut strings that are now wound steel strings typically, and they sit on top of the bridge. The bridge is made of very flexible wood. It's similar to balsam wood. It might be from the same tree. So the bridge is actually very sensitive to weather, changes in humidity. It's also very sensitive to the vibration of the strings. So that's what will carry the impetus of what you're playing down into the front plate of the cello. It's going to carry it to the back of the cello, both through the sides, but also through a sound post, which is about right here, just below the bridge, carries it down. There's another piece inside the cello called a bass bar, which is about here, and it just supports the low end of the cello. And once everything's resonated inside, and this is all happening very quickly, sound starts coming out. And of course, we have the F-holes here, which help direct sound out so that it's not muffled. The end pin also plays a role in carrying the sound out. So when you're performing, it's ideal to not have a rubber rock stop or a rubber tip, but to be able to make contact with the floor. That's going to help fill the space. That's what concert halls do, is they amplify the instrument further. One way you can think about the cello is that the cello is basically just this, and it has its own acoustic amplification box built into it. It's not electronic amplification, it's acoustic amplification. The bow. When you get the bow out, ideally, probably, it will be loosened like this. And that's always how you want to leave it when you put it in this case. You want to loosen it up. When you get it out to play, you'll want to tighten it to, something where the top looks 2/3 of the way up, or another way to think about it is that the space between the hairs and the stick are about half what they are at the tip. It's a little approximate because it'll depend on your bow, but those have been metrics that have worked really well for me. When you get the bow out, it might not be rosined. It might be a new bow, depending on how you got your bow, depending on the circumstances. So what you're gonna want is rosin, because you can't make a sound without rosin. The way that the bow fundamentally works is that it's horsehair from horses in very cold regions, like Siberia is primarily where most bow hairs around the world come from. And they have little microscopic hooks in the hairs. Very, very coarse. Not as coarse as like donkey hair or something like that, but very, very coarse. That alone can't move the string because they're too small. But what the hooks do is they stick the rosin to it. The rosin gets stuck to the bow, and then you can actually see the white rosin that's rubbed off from me playing earlier onto the strings. So when you take it out, it's just this little tree resin thing. Mine's a little old, I'm getting close to a new one. You don't have to let rosin go forever. Don't be prideful about years of rosin that you haven't replaced. Every 6 months to a year is okay, and they're only about 12 bucks, so it's not that big of a deal. The best way that I've ever found to rosin the bow is to just rest it against my leg here. Some people do it like this, but it's just a lot harder to get enough energy transfer into the hairs. So to get the best, most even rosin, I like to do it like this. And I just do little shimmies, first up and down, and then, and I'm doing it a little quickly here, then I do it side to side, and this is just to try to get some of the hairs that wouldn't have been gotten by just one direction. And then I do kind of bigger sweeps, finishing with one really nice one. And that's just gonna be how you get your bow rosin. Now, if it's a new hair, if it's new hairs on the bow, you're gonna have to rosin more than that. And it's also helpful as you're rosining to really get this bow into the string to kind of break in the hairs. Like something really gritty like that. It doesn't have to sound good, you're just trying to break those hairs in. Okay, so we're almost ready. Let's talk about bow hold, because the bow hold is one of the trickier parts of playing the cello. And in fact, I would probably say that bow challenges overall amount to 60 or even 70% of the total challenges of playing cello. It just is. Cello is already hard enough to play intonation without frets. It's already hard enough to make it around a rather large and curved fingerboard, but that's the easy part. The hard part is this. The hard part is getting the right sound. The hard part is getting the right articulation. The hard part is not having just bad sounds because your bow's not controlled well. So if you've never picked up a bow before, it might be tempting to grip it like this. Sometimes it can be helpful to practice, as a practice technique, to do that, because it forces you to really think about what the rest of your hand is doing that's not your fingers. But if you'll listen, it's just a little bit too heavy of a sound. What we want to do instead is be able to hold the bow with our fingers so that our fingers act as little springs, little cushions to help the bow. In this way, we're able to be flexible with our fingers, to transfer energy through the bow, actually allow the bow itself to resonate, because it's able, the energy from the hairs transfers to the frog, and then instead of getting choked by our fingers, actually transfers into the bow and also helps the sound. So the reason why the bow hold is a little tricky is just that you have to pronate the wrist. At least this is what I've found to be the trickiest thing to get. It's just really, you really want intuitively, and to have to pronate it to turn it this way. This is pronation. It's just a medical term, but it's commonly talked about with the cello. That's going to be how you get that springiness. What you want to do to get your hand ready for this is to pretend that you're flicking off water, like you get water from an imaginary bucket and you flick it off. And then when your hands are limp like that, when your fingers are limp, that's basically how you want it on the bow, lining up the middle finger with the top of the frog here. So this back part is called the frog. Line up the middle finger with that. The first finger is going to control this area where there's this little bit of winding. You're going to have the ring finger on the frog itself, and the pinky is going to kind of control the back. What you do is you just kind of like, I'll show from behind, you just kind of like bring your thumb in across from your second finger. And that's the only change you're going to make other than the pronation. If you have your hands relaxed, middle finger there, pronate as you bring your thumb in, that's kind of going to be your bow hold, your core bow hold. And it might take a little bit of practice to get. Play around with it. Some people do this spider crawl thing to prove that they have flexibility. Some people, but all that matters is that you're practicing actually playing with it so that you know what it's like to have the bow hold all the way through the bow. Because as you move, you're going to have to change the angle just a little bit. When you're in here, the inside of your wrist might feel very uncomfortably close to the fingerboard. As you play, you're going to keep rotating out, and by the time you're out, your wrist is far straighter. In fact, when you come back, it's a little different because you're going to lead. You're going to lead with the wrist. So as you first go, you want to relax your arm into the string. You want to first let the hairs go into the string. Relax your arm and allow the relaxation to be what causes it to play. But as you go back up, lead with your wrist. And you want to try to get it so that there's not a stop in the sound. That was a stop in the sound. Or you don't want a chink in the sound. You just want a very smooth, continuous sound. You can also listen for overtones. So what actually makes the sound of an instrument distinct from other instruments, like even when it's playing the same note, is that the note, which is the note you hear, otherwise known as the fundamental when we're talking about overtones, is only one frequency that's actually sounding when we listen to an instrument. There's all these other frequencies that are natural ratios in nature that account for like an octave above, double the frequency. It's always going to exist. The sort of balance of these overtone frequencies accounts for tone, and they can also be accessed by using harmonics. So if you lightly touch halfway up the string, you get that C. I'm not quite sure what that buzzing is. I'll take care of that later. You get that C. You didn't touch down, you just lightly touched it. But if you look closely, the center isn't actually vibrating. So that's what's fantastic, is when you do that, it chokes up the string from playing its normal fundamental note, but what it does is it kind of splits the string into two, and you have two strings that are half as long as the main string, both playing double the frequency. So you can listen for this. So you can listen for either the octave or the fifth or the next third up here. This one's fun to listen for. Whether or not the lapel mic I'm using is going to be good enough for you guys to hear this in the video, I don't know. But it's something you can listen for in person. Very, very cool. So when you actually start trying to play the cello, you're also going to want to access different notes. We've talked a little bit about how to play, how to practice the open string, the bow hold, again, in very broad strokes, because we're going to go into this in detail in future videos. We got you guys, we promise. But what you're also going to need to do is be able to play different notes, to press the string different amounts with your fingers. And you're also going to want to have a nice relaxed hand. And this time we actually get to keep our wrist straight. The wrist is always going to be straight. And that means that the elbow just has to be high enough to support that. Like the bow, the thumb is always going to be opposite the second finger, with few exceptions, but for the most part. So you want to have your thumb on the other side of your second finger, not squeezing. You don't want to squeeze. That's not, just lightly touch it. You're just balancing it. It's mostly going to be the weight of your arm that actually pushes the finger into the string. It's not going to be you pressing. It's just going to be weight. And that's the same with the bow. This is going to be a big concept in general learning the cello. The more you can figure out how to make the sound you want in a way that's natural and relaxed, not only the easier time are you going to have playing, but the better it's going to sound. So what you want to do similarly is try to figure out the way that the fingers are actually supposed to go. Because I find that a lot of people, when they first play cello, their fingers don't go quite far enough away. So if they play, it's horribly flat. So you do have to find where the notes are. And this is where a piano or an online reference can just be helpful for kind of getting that in. You want to really ingrain that. But I'm going to teach you a scale that you can practice, very very simple, in the sense that there's a lot more complicated scales, but I think there's so much information that's packed into just this one thing that you can practice it for probably weeks and get a lot out of it, how you're playing cello. And it's just that one octave D major scale, starting on the D string. The cello strings are A, D, G, C. So that's ants digging in the dirt, digging in the ground, all the way to China. That's how I learned it. Very back in the day, if that helps you. Ants digging in the dirt, digging in the ground, all the way to China. So the D major scale, the fingering is the open D, 1, 3, 4. And then the open A, 1, 3, 4. The same fingering. And you don't have to play it that fast. Starting just one bow, when you're practicing your one bow, you know, you'll get it. Maybe even do it back up, and then try the first finger. All the way up. So that's how you would start by doing it. And if the note's a little out of tune, the real winner way to handle that is to start from the beginning. But you don't have to be that brutal on yourself at first because you're finding where these notes are at first. In general, I think it's really helpful with cello to be kind to yourself. It's a super hard instrument to play. Really almost impossible instrument to master. There's a lot that's unstable about it. Pulling a string with hooks in the hair, steel strings that are very rich with harmonics and often want to do weird things like a wolf tone. It's just an unstable instrument. You know, we don't have frets. So there's just a lot to master. And I think that's part of what makes cello so appealing, is that when you are in control of all that stuff enough to play the melody or whatever it is, it's kind of overwhelming as a listener. It's like, whoa, you can hear all of these little nuances that are going into it, and you can't really account for all of them, especially if you're not a cellist. It's just, whoa, how is it so rich? How does it plume like that? That's what I loved about cello when I very first heard it, is it was like smoke rising. So I've always loved that. So we're almost at the end of our video. This, again, has just been a video to introduce in broad strokes how to play the cello, introduce me as your teacher. We hope that you're going to subscribe to watch more lessons, because we're going to go deeper into all the things that we talked about, including how to get the cello set up, problems with the cello that you might have to deal with the strings, left hand position, the bow hand and position, how to put it together into scales. We're going to talk more in depth about all that, getting into playing music, but you have to subscribe so you can see those other videos, okay? You have to subscribe to see the other videos. Once again, I'm Justin Leopard, also known as the Vagabond Cellist, your cello teacher here with Higher Hertz. We really appreciate you guys watching, and we'll see you next time.